I opened my bullet journal video by saying that I was both the queen of focus and master of procrastination. And this is true. In 2015, my focus was so laser sharp that I was able to drop into deep concentration or flow state for hours and lose track of time absorbed in my work. But then in late 2016, I had a period of about 3 months where I was interrupted approximately every half hour during the majority of my working hours. When I wasn't being interrupted, I was anticipating being interrupted. And when the distraction was over, I thought, great, now I can get back to being focused. 8 years. It took me 8 years to regain my focus, though admittedly there was a pandemic in the middle which didn't help. So having experienced both high levels of focus and a prolonged period of procrastination, I can empathise with anyone watching this video who is experiencing procrastination. Perhaps you're procrastinating by watching this video. And because ultimately I was able to resolve my procrastination pretty much overnight, but after 8 years of trying, I think I'm in a good position to make this video and share my experiences. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Emily, a lecturer in the Arts and Humanities and former procrastinator. I should reiterate at this point that I'm not a mental health professional and I'm making this video on the basis of my own experiences. So do seek professional advice if this is appropriate to your circumstances. There are many videos on YouTube about procrastination which adopt different approaches. In this video, I'll share how I constructed my own understanding through reflection to overcome procrastination. I've since realised that much of my understanding has roots in psychological theory, but I'll leave that to the experts and focus on my own experience. So, what is procrastination? This is what the Oxford English Dictionary says, and it's worth noting that anyone can suffer from procrastination. Procrastination is not a new phenomenon. The ancient Greeks also had a term to describe procrastination, and it's reassuring to know that some of our greatest thinkers have not only suffered from procrastination, but also written about it. Here's just a few quotes. I included the quote from Victorian author Charles Dickens because I like the way he described procrastination as a thief of time. But from the ancient writers, I was particularly impressed how both touched upon ideas very similar to those from modern psychology. Seneca acknowledges the modern concept of self-abandonment, and I particularly liked his phrase, denies us the present by promising the future. Marcus Aurelius touches upon what we would now describe as emotional regulation, prominent in our modern understanding of procrastination. Both writers situate procrastination as an internal force, and I'll return to this idea later in the video. I've written lots of notes to myself about procrastination, and these terms sum up some of my thinking about the problem of procrastination and how this manifests. I'll draw upon just a few of these terms in discussing key learning points. I want to draw a distinction between the cause, which I'll discuss in the next video chapter, and the effect, which we'll explore here. There were several key moments of learning for me. I'm sharing these in the hope that my reflections and learning can help other people struggling with procrastination and reflecting on their own experiences. The first lies in control. If we return for a moment to my story in 2016, I experienced a difficulty where I perceived I had no control over the interruptions. There were compelling reasons for this perception, but I now realise that my issue lay with personal boundaries and lack of them, and not with lack of control. This is important to acknowledge because I could have experienced 8 productive years rather than 8 years struggling with procrastination and feeling bad if I'd known this in 2016. This brings me to my second point. As Seneca realised, procrastination is self-sabotage. The discomfort is purely self-inflicted. But as a friend pointed out, no one else can see this discomfort associated with tasks to be completed. Outwardly, to people who knew me, I was the same person as a procrastinator in 2017 as I had been as a productivity guru in 2015. And for this reason, I also experienced imposter syndrome. If you're meeting deadlines and performing well, no one else is aware of the struggle and discomfort experienced by the procrastinator. In other words, you are doing this to yourself. Realising that ultimately I was in control of the procrastination, even though when you are experiencing this it feels as though you have no control, was one of the ways I was able to overcome this. I'll share more practical tips to overcoming procrastination later, but first let's examine the cause of procrastination. Behavioural psychology explains the cause of procrastination. Just one theory which might contribute is Skinner's famous operant conditioning experiment with rats. I arrived at my understanding of procrastination not by Googling these psychological theories, but by reflecting on my own experience. And I was pleased when I found that I'd drawn similar conclusions through hard thinking to those of psychologists, because through learning for myself, my understanding was greater. I also had confirmation that I was along the right lines. I arrived at my first insight by thinking about the process of undertaking a task, which is interrupted by procrastination, and I realised that this was a cycle. I ended up calling this the shame cycle because I realised that behaviour was largely driven by avoiding shame. This is what it looked like. You have a task to complete, which is probably within your abilities to complete reasonably well. Your first impression of the task might be that it is doable sometime in the future, but uncertainty arises at the point when you have to deal with the task. You feel discomfort. Perhaps you'll mess up or do the task badly. Perhaps it looks more difficult when you begin to examine the task with the thought of needing to engage with the task right now. All of a sudden, this task is beginning to feel very stressful. You're not sure you know the answer or feel you can complete the task well. Why did you agree to this? By this stage, you're probably feeling profoundly uncomfortable, and to avoid this feeling, seek a distraction. This part of the cycle, picking up the task and avoiding it, continues until you can do so no more. Now the deadline is approaching and you have to do the task. If your task involved writing, you'll probably find that after a significant period of writer's block, all of a sudden the words are flowing under the pressure of the deadline. But here's the problem. Although you are likely to meet the deadline, chances are you have felt miserable for an extended period of time, knowing that this task is something that needs to be completed in the present and not the future. You've made your life hell. My insight came from focusing on the point where I became stuck and unable to work on the task. I thought of this as a bottleneck. What was I afraid of? I realised that there were several factors influencing this point in the cycle: perfectionism and shame, or fear of making a mistake. And I think this tied into the effect I discussed with respect to control, knowing what I could control and what I couldn't control. I can't control other people's responses, but I can control my work on the task. I can't do any more other than try my best with the tasks under the circumstances I am working. Alongside this, I had a second insight. I gave this a silly name of the black hole theory of impact. I realised that negative experiences or perceptions of negativity were all being pulled into a black hole which was growing ever larger. Sometimes this negativity was external, other people, but it was also internally driven by the process of procrastination, as already explained. The impact was that as time passed, my self-confidence and resilience was ever diminishing. Quite simply, my ability to beat procrastination was diminishing with every task which was delayed. Once I understood the cause of the bottleneck and the ever-expanding black hole which was stealing my self-confidence and resilience, I was finally able to beat procrastination. I realised that I trained myself to be highly productive during the period 2008 to 2015, and I'd also trained myself to procrastinate during that 3-month period in 2016. Ultimately, I did have control over my productivity. It was within my power. I also realised that my brain was tricking me, and it was only an illusion that I wasn't able to achieve my tasks, or at the very least, I could try my best. So in this section of the video, I'll share some practical ways I began the process of retraining my brain to be productive and efficient rather than choose procrastination. In an early part of my recovery, I tracked my time in detail to assess my situation. I did this using my bullet journal and recorded every activity I undertook over a couple of weeks. The results were quite surprising because one of the main findings was that I was working exceptionally hard. Remember how I mentioned that other people thought 2015 Emily was the same as 2017 Emily? Tracking my time in detail helped me to see their perspective and send a little self-forgiveness my way. What helped me more than anything was the process of the shame cycle, particularly the bottleneck and getting stuck. If I felt discomfort, I would pause and think, why am I feeling discomfort and is this rational? Spoiler alert, 99.9% of the time it wasn't rational. This allowed me to avoid the moment I would usually be diverted off track into procrastination and keep going with my primary objective. A couple of tips relate to just making a start. Answering emails which included problem solving used to take me what felt like an unreasonably long time. So I cut out the hesitation by imagining that I was answering my emails with a firing squad ready and waiting for me to be diverted off task. This was a real motivating factor, and I realised that I did know the answers and was quite capable of undertaking the problem solving that I had to undertake. Sometimes I would break what seemed to be an overwhelming task down into parts and just make a start on part of the task. This really helped me to see that often what felt like an overwhelming task was actually very doable with a bit of resilience. Another point relates to perfectionism and overthinking. I had collected a lot of thoughts over several months to contribute to this video, and I was incredibly daunted during the script writing phase about synthesizing and making sense of these ideas. This was hard work, and I had to balance how I might talk about a very personal situation in a general way. I kept myself going during the script writing process by thinking done is better than perfect. And I often use this phrase to motivate me when I'm feeling underconfident about approaching a task. I'll outline a couple of small challenges I've observed. It's easy to lose a lot of time when switching tasks. This is something I'm mindful of, and I can build this factor into my time planning. I've also noticed that some tasks are mentally draining. Imagine a busy and long meeting. So for this kind of task, recovery time or lighter tasks might need to be scheduled after a draining task. 2015's productivity guru Emily made excellent use of time blocking to manage her time, even though I didn't realise this was what it was called at the time. So I've experimented with this, though since I was on the path to recovery from procrastination and not fully recovered, I found that this was only partially successful. Now that I'm feeling a lot more in control of my time, I'm going to give this another go. So that's how I cured 8 years of procrastination overnight. If you're suffering from procrastination, remember, I trained myself to be productive in the first instance, trained myself to procrastinate, and then trained myself to return to productivity. So this is within your control to become the best version of yourself. Reflection is key, and this can take some time, so be kind to yourself. You've got this. Please do share any tips in the comments, and so together we can build a useful resource for anyone who finds this video. A couple of useful resources I found helpful from a mindfulness perspective are linked in the description below. And if you've been watching this video whilst procrastinating, take this as your sign to get back to work, just as soon as you've watched this video on how to create a bullet journal to manage your time. You've got this.